Okay, hello everybody. We'll pull up the slideshow here, and right off the bat, I am I've got to address the article that Carol sent around just this week. Timothy Snyder made another entry in his position, and I thought fleshed it out pretty darn well. He focused on 9 underlying factors that he thinks are going to decide the outcome. And he goes through each one of these systematically in his style. Very disciplined, and he even gives you a memory aid, a mnemonic, the first letter of each one of these factors, the way of analyzing it. He's quite straightforward, and he's just as optimistic as he was a couple of months ago. So nothing new there. Interestingly, he mentioned somebody that we focused on when we were doing the history of the Ukraine. And Harold, those are available on a video, should you want to go back and look at any of them. But he points out that Shoigu, the defense minister, has just called out for more intense Russian attacks in all directions, which he takes as meaning muddying the water without any specifics. And it seems like more desperation than strategy. He points out, as we knew, that Shoigu has no military background, nor does Putin, and that he was a public relations expert, which we learned about. And I'll just go over real quickly what we went over. He's been the defense minister for 10 years now, 10 years, and he's the interesting thing about him is he's a hybrid. He had a Ukrainian mother and a Tuvan father. Tuva is a Asian country right snuggled next to Mongolia, famous for their throat singing. And he became known to Russians as the Minister of Emergency Situations, and there were plenty of them as the Soviet Union converted from communism to the market economy, such as it is. And he got involved in being the face of the regime during responding to also acts of terrorism. And he was made a hero of the Russian Federation. And he, at the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, as abrupt as it was, one of the great mysteries was that he disappeared for a couple of weeks. He's resurfaced and was considered to be so much involved that the EU has singled him out. And we added then him to the blocked persons list. So his fingerprints are all over this. He has been standing by Putin's side in the Ukraine ever since the maiden revolt and the invasion of Crimea. He's one of Putin's confidants, one of the few people in a high regime that represent ethnic diversity. Pretty much the FSB is white Russians, Caucasian Russians, mostly from St. Petersburg. Okay, another, and then that's a repeat. So I didn't edit this very well. So sorry about that. I seem to be going backwards, don't I? this is okay, going forwards. Your fingers wander over this keyboard. So sorry. This is him with this Bolton in 2018. Military exercises. Putin was claiming something, and then the week before the invasion of the Ukraine, he went to Syria and joked around with Assad. The Washington Post, by May, when it was clear that Russia was on their heels, speculated that he might be on his way out, but no, he survived. And in July, he got to announce the liberation of Lugansk. And here, Putin's making an exception and sitting close to somebody. He recently arrived in Istanbul to negotiate that grain deal. And we don't know if that's going to happen, where they get to take the grain from Odessa through the Black Sea, but already there's been problems with that. We'll see if that survives. But anyway, he negotiated it. All right. So I just felt I needed to address him. It's just interesting that Timothy Snyder has had his eyes on Shoigu just like we have from the very beginning. So, all right. Now, I'll just kind of throw it open because I sent that around with the intention that we could have a follow-up discussion from last week, and then we'll move on actually finally to California after many delays. So anybody have any thoughts about the Ukraine, Timothy Snyder? Anything about last week's debate where we heard from the realist side, Mearsheimer? Okay. As we go on, I'm going to try to figure out ways to make this a little bit more interactive. Well, we'll see. I'll keep working on it. But I'm eminently interruptible. All right, I think in getting on with California, we covered the Earth and all the shifts and the continents and subduction and the creation of California. Now we're going to add air and water and storms and trade winds and the climate going from the ice age forward. So I wanted to just make the point that the default for California weather is a dry desert. And it's based on this Hadley's cell circulation, which looks at what happens with air and water, and the circulation describes the equator, where most of the action is, with a lot of moisture and evaporation, and then the rising moist air forms into clouds and falls back to Earth. And by the time it gets to 30 degrees from the equator, in both the north and south, you get a descending dry air. And that's what most of California is, between 30 and 40 degrees. And were it not for other factors, we are supposed to be a desert. And we see parts of California where that default certainly applies. The other thing that they point out is that a prevailing wind along the Central Valley coast that blows a drier wind, maybe as part of this or in addition to the Hadley circulation. So last week, Carol delivered us the news that Monterey was out of water. And the history of farming in the Salinas Valley was laid out very nicely in East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Now, the hub of the story then was about the new innovation of refrigerated trucks, which meant that the father in East of Eden could finally sell his products on a larger market with refrigeration. So it centered on that. I guess the water was much more reliable than down in Monterey, the Salinas Valley, at the time that this was written. So I'm getting a tapping. So who look around and maybe mute yourself if you're generating tapping. And so that's East of Eden. I do not recommend the movie, even though it stars a Hoosier. I recommend instead the miniseries that stars Jane Seymour with Timothy Bottoms and Lloyd Bridges. Much
better yet, the book.
Much superior. The movie eliminates a key character who happens to be Asian, but he resumes his familiar place as one of the key characters in the miniseries. Read the book too. So the Salinas Valley, yeah.
I think too that it was more refrigeration on rail cars than on trucks.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly right. And there's a famous scene where he's loaded all his lettuce and into the box cars, and overnight the refrigeration froze and stopped working, and all the produce spoiled before the train could even pull out of Salinas. Salinas deserves an extra word. It's one of the break in the coastal range is one of the few breaks along the coast of California. And Steinbeck in the beginning of East of Eden spends a whole chapter talking about geology and the natural environment. And he talks about the difference between the two mountain ranges, the one to the east and the one to the west, which is dark and brooding, whereas in the east it's the direction of the morning sun and the sunrise. The coastal range is also described by Rawls. I've recommended James Rawls' book on California interpretive history. He describes the western edge of the continental plate nosing out along the ocean floor. With the sedimentary rocks that were scraped off the Pacific plate piled in great confusion. And we remember we went through that whole thing in the beginning weeks. I'm going to ask one more time for people to look around and see if there's something in their system that could be generating noise. Mute in case of any doubt. Mute your Zoom. I'd appreciate it. Okay, so here's the accretionary wedge that the continental crust has scraped off the top of the Pacific plate. And this is where we live. We live among geologic great confusion, a mixture of everything. Mount Diablo is not a volcano. It's a collection of this confused wedge material that's been scraped off. If you ever go up to the visitor center, Mount Diablo, at least they used to have an animation of all the different layers, and it's not at all straightforward. These layers in Mount Diablo all flip over, and you'll see an example of that later on, how the bottom of the Pacific Ocean can be at the top of the ridge right behind my house. All right, so Rawls sees it as a metaphor because the material that came on top of the Pacific plate came from all over the Pacific rim through some kind of movement of rocks and surface material. And he thinks it's a great metaphor for California's culture and ethnic diversity now. I love that, when you can take something kind of boring and turn it into something like a metaphor. So just to review the Pacific plate, it's a pretty big one, second only to the North American plate. And here wedged between the two up north along, starting along Shasta, which is still an active, has the potential to be an active volcano, and along the Cascades, Mount St. Helena, which is the Juan de Fuca plate, which is the remnant of the Farallon plate, which just finally disappeared, and under the continental plate, it disappears because the continental plate is no longer pushing directly against the North American plate. It's moving to the northwest, and that's why Los Angeles, which Shigeko, you're sitting on the Pacific plate someday. Los Angeles will be a twin city of San Francisco. The San Andreas Fault, everything to the east of that is on the continental plate. So we know exactly where the intersection is, and the coastal range is just a confusion of debris from that collision. There's another metaphor here. Colin Woodward had a book called The American Nations, and he divides it up into 11 different areas that each have a unique history, a unique immigration, different people from Europe coming at different times. My people, the Scots-Irish, come relatively late and wind up in greater Appalachia and the deep South. The far west he calls it the left coast, which obviously can apply politically as well, a fresh way of looking at politics. I'll just throw in something that caught my attention this week. Predicted is a betting market where people can buy stocks in what they think are likely outcomes of future events. So for the question of who's going to be the 2024 Democrat candidate, you can buy stock. And the stock is jiggered, the cost of the stock is jiggered to roughly equal the percent chance of success. So they would put the betting market, which is simply a betting market. People have bought stock in Joe Biden with the behaving as if there's a 31% chance. And these often diverge from polls, and in many cases have been more accurate in polls. But breaking through just in the last couple of weeks is Gavin Newsom, even ahead of his fellow Californian. So Gavin Newsom is now in second place. There's daily movement, even hourly movement on the betting markets as they respond. So I'm sorry, just an irresistible tangent. Now back, yeah.
On your tangent, I'm just wondering, do they ever add any names or change any names?
Yeah. Gavin Newsom was just added, I think, a month ago. And that, I think, was when he appeared on the Florida political scene. I think he was trolling DeSantis. And why would he troll DeSantis? Well, all of a sudden people say, well, wait a minute, maybe he's tipping his hand here that he might have something in mind. And I've wondered about it. And I should have been smart enough to buy stock very early on, but I didn't. Anyway, any other questions? All right. So now, what's saving us from being our desert, which would be the default given our position vis-a-vis the equator? And it's the water cycles. The California current, which goes from north to south, brings seasonal wet clouds from the north, when we used to have a rainy season. Let's hope we get one this year. So it's based as part of the Pacific current. So there is a Pacific current, and the Pacific current is relevant for the history of California, as we're going to see. The Manila galleons that were carrying the gold and silver, mainly silver, from Mexico to the Philippines to trade for Chinese tea and silk and other luxury items, followed this Pacific current. So they'd make a big circular elliptical trip from Acapulco to Manila and back, and look, as they came back, they came along the coast. And the galleons were much bigger than other Spanish ships. And often they were escorted by smaller, more nimble ships. But folks, pirates like Sir Francis Drake, who was knighted for his piracy, would attack these galleons in the Pacific Ocean, and thus we have Drake's Bay at Point Reyes. So this just is a more detailed view of the Pacific current. These galleons were received all along the circular route, even in Guam. We had friends in Guam, and they adopted a Chamorro suns. In Acapulco, where we're used to a different kind of tourist tradition, they also have a good sailing bay, and it was the terminus of the Manila galleon. There's other factors.
There's supposed to be a wreck of a galleon off the coast of Oregon that is slowly revealing itself. 100 years ago, they had some stuff wash ashore, and it was like beeswax and some Chinese porcelain.
Okay.
It's point of interest.
Yeah, no, we'll keep an eye on that. Also, in the Pacific current was during World War II, the Japanese devised incendiary balloons that they launched in Japan to follow the jet stream as a part of the current, and those incendiary balloons fell on the forests of Oregon and started forest fires. So that's that kind of rhymes with the point we're talking about now, the Pacific current. All right, so it gets interesting because in addition to the flow of water, there's an upwelling that brings nutrients closer to the surface along the coast. And we're going to see that kelp beds may have been a path that kept early immigrants from Siberia going. The kelp beds were habitats for fish and would sustain life and make it easy. And now the problem is the kelp beds are disappearing. They're 90% gone. Who knew? This came as a real surprise to me. And it's just been in the last decade or two. And then there's this bizarre sea urchin, which is actually a gourmet delicacy. So there's some people that are trying to interrupt this cycle by harvesting sea urchins and selling them as food. There's an economic gain there, kind of an unexpected connection. And we have a neighbor who knew all about it. He talked about enjoying ordering sea urchin gonads, that is sea urchin genitalia. Go figure. So it gets really pretty complicated. I don't want to get into all of these factors, but some of this explains the seasonal rain that we get that falls on the western face of the Sierras. And it does that because of this rain shadow phenomenon. Moist clouds are forced up by the Sierras, and they cool as they're forced up by the Sierras, and they drop the rain before they reach the peak. And of course, a lot of it that high up becomes snow. And the east side gets less rain because of the rain shadow. So California's water supply is greatly aided by the snowmelt, as we all know. And so this is the California aqueduct and all its feeders and major dams. And this will, as we tell the story of California later on, will be a big part of it. and it goes all the way down to the Tehachapi, which we'll remember is part of that transverse range that comes when the Sierra Range gets bumps into the Pacific Plate and gets turned sideways. The California aqueduct does continue, and the state has a totally managed water system that goes all the way from Shasta on down. But look who's not part of the water system: LA and San Diego. So the other side of the Tehachapis are figured it out on their own, and they're independent from the California aqueduct. And that'll be important when we get to politics later on. And then, of course, we all remember Chinatown. It's only loosely associated with the annexation of the Owens Valley, but it certainly captures the conspiratorial enterprise that LA launched. And so here in red, below the outer border of the California system, is the LA system, which comes from a little valley up here on the dry side of the Sierras, but it gets enough rain, the Owens Valley. And then the LA aqueduct, which we can all see when we drive down 5. And that water was stolen fair and square from the Owens Valley. It's true. Mulholland, who was the architect of it, went up on vacations and purchased plots of land each time he went up until he basically owned the water rights to the Owens Valley. This was resisted. We talk about terrorism. The aqueduct, the Los Angeles aqueduct, was blown up 13 different times during its construction. San Diego, where our youngest son just moved, it gets most of its water from the Colorado in a separate deal using the Colorado River aqueduct. A misfiring of the aqueduct by the All-American Canal. One night it failed dramatically and created de novo, within days, the Salton Sea. So the Salton Sea is the result of an accident. It's not supposed to be there, at least not in let's say historical times, which we would say would be a couple of thousand years. Before then, I'm not sure. So it's complicated. My friend decided, as he toured and looked at the water system, to render his own version. This is David Pepper, ICO, and he might be in attendance next week. I'm not sure. But he sketched this out, and having visited the Pecos mountains and doing a road trip with my high school buddies down the Rio Grande, I could appreciate this aspect of it. But you notice how far to the west the Mississippi basin is. The Missouri And Lewis and Clark carried it, which they explored, carried it quite a distance. And so this drought that we're having, if you take a 1,200 year perspective on this, which I saw, you realize how epic it is that you see the temperatures that we're having now in the Colorado plateau, where the Colorado River is formed. It's at an all-time high. Northern Hemisphere land temperature over the last 1,200 years. Very disturbing, especially this dive down here, the flow of the Sacramento. So it's interesting to see a bigger perspective. Mediterranean climates. So what I've described is a Mediterranean climate that's basically dry, but that has some features that give it water. And there are only 5 around the world. We're one of 5. And so the Andes provide that, the Mediterranean, the Alps and the Pyrenees, and then South Africa, Cape Town, and then Southern Australia, kind of in two bunches. My college roommate lives in this Mediterranean climate. Here's a little more detail on the Mediterranean climates around the world, a little more dynamic, showing trends, and the orange and the brown are bad trends, and that's where we sit at this time, adjusting as we must. So here's a map of the Mediterranean areas, the vertical hatched areas of California. And here are the parts, including the central, a lot of the Central Valley, that are semi-arid or steppe. So they're just survive as agriculture by virtue of the snow melt. And then we have actual deserts inhospitable to irrigation even. And of course, we have our alpine areas where we all like to visit in summer and winter. The Ice Age. So this is going to play a story in the history of humans coming from Siberia down the coast. And they, who knows when they got here for sure, but it's somewhere between 15,000 and 25,000 years ago. And had they gotten down here following kelp beds, they would have gone on to the Farallon landmass that very well may have been connected. If it was an island, it wasn't that far to the shore. As the ice melted and the water level rose, you can see had they arrived 10,000 years ago, they would have been a little bit further away, certainly from the Golden Gate than they were now. And there wouldn't have been a Golden Gate. A lot of this would have been much different. So a different map showing pretty much the same thing. And at that point, the San Francisco Bay would have probably been a big valley with the Sacramento River running through the bottom of the valley. Again, and then it's interesting that, and I'm hoping next week that David Clinnick will talk about it, that a lot of the archaeological digs are from the Channel Islands, because early on, as the Siberian immigrants came down following the kelp beds, those islands would have been much bigger. And a lot of the early villages that were established and habitats are underwater. And so it's interesting that they found some evidence of a possible comet that hit the Earth almost 13,000 years ago. As this evidence exists on the islands, and again, the islands are part of that transverse mountain range. The theory extrapolates and claims that the results of the comet may have sparked human civilization in California, that there was a mass extinction of the megafauna. So megafauna are just the big mammoths, large deer, and one of the early theories was, well, these animals had no fear of humans because there hadn't been any humans. So they trusted humans, and that humans could easily go and slaughter them all. They didn't have the instincts to know that man was a predator. But this theory says no, it was a mass extinction from a comet. And so humans at that time may have switched from being hunter-gatherers to collecting seeds and trying to live off by cultivating plants. And we know that the larger agricultural revolution that it's part of the European Asian history took place around 10,000 years ago, roughly around the same time. And so, but what do you get when you get agriculture? You get permanent settlements. Anyway, this is all theory and still subject to heated debate, but fascinating for the history of California, which may have put California ahead of the rest of North America in the development of agriculture. So this is an earlier map of the ice age when the water level was much lower, and there was an ice sheet that was separating Siberia. When did the ice sheet become travelable? Or one theory now says maybe they came by boats. As the ice melted, the sea level rose, and this was when these different bits of land finally were created and became a waterfront. I'm going to use this as a segue to the people of the New World and sprint to the finish here. Here is a National Geographic map showing the possible coastal route that might have been taken as by 20,000 to 18,000 years ago. An overland route would have taken longer to open up as the ice mountains retreated, and they came down the coast following a string of kelp beds. So would they make it now with the dying of the kelp beds? Interesting question. Then there's a possible later immigration from the old world of the Clovis civilizations. But the current theory is that the first Californians came from Siberia, and the Clovis people came much later. We'll go into detail later. But now I'm going to jump to 1492, in general, before the European age, the American, Native Americans. I'm going to skip over thousands and thousands of years and start going backward in time. And I hope it'll become clear why. But to start with the Miwok, this is where next week's guest comes in. This is my segue, David Clinnick. So I met him out on the trail in the open space behind my house, and he has opened my eyes to appreciating where I live. Hiking with him along this trail, he would point out the layers of these ridges and what they mean. This is Shell Ridge, and this is Mount Diablo in the background. This is across from Shell Ridge. This is the ridge I climb, the summit ridge. Interestingly enough, Summit Ridge has more shells than Shell Ridge. It's always been rich in shells. We were lucky enough to have a geologist live across the street, and he tried to explain to me then how this was from the bottom of the Pacific Plate. And I can barely understand it now. But tons of seashells, which we've shown our grandkids. Walking along a trail that I've walked hundreds of times, David looks down and says, "Whoa, what's this?" And it was a worked piece of obsidian that you're not supposed to pick up, so it stuck to my shoe is what happened. For me, it looked like an arrowhead, but he said, no, but it is definitely worked. He looked at the grooves as a paleontologist would. And this is probably from the Pima Indians. The other thing he pointed out to me, which is really interesting, is the American Discovery Trail, which I didn't even know existed. So think Pacific Trail, which goes north-south. Think Appalachian Trail, which goes north-south. Well, there is an east-west trail that's an accumulation of recreational trails, like the one behind my house, and old abandoned roads, and some biking trails are part of it. Many of them were Native American foot trails, because where they could go on foot, we can go on foot, and we can take our bikes. And we've been on some original Native American trails, and we went up and down the Mississippi River. The Natchez Trace is a famous trail from the Mississippi culture and the Mississippian culture. There are some parts of this where there are horse access. You see it breaks into two parts, one to include Chicago and the other to include St. Louis. I guess there was just too much big a debate, and they couldn't settle on one. So it's duplicated in this particular stretch. And here's what it looks like in places as it works its way across the Rockies. But when it comes into California, it comes in at Tahoe, comes down through Sacramento, and it comes through Walnut Creek. And then on through Berkeley, you take the ferry over to San Francisco, and then you end up at Point Reyes. So Walnut Creek, it's part of the Mount Diablo Briones Trail. And it hooks up with the Contra Costa Canal Trail. Here's a sign in Clayton verifying that the American Discovery Trail exists. So to get on it at Mount Diablo in Clayton, you still have 122 miles to the Point Reyes, which seems like a long way to me for Point Reyes. But Delaware is 4,778 miles to the east. So this map I'm about ready to show you all can pull up on East Bay Parks. There's it's the Iron Horse maps. There's a north and a south. So when you go on, they by default give you the south map. So, but if you go in and type north in, you'll get this map. And here is Mount Diablo down here, and Mount Diablo Briones Trail comes down from Mount Diablo itself through the Diablo Foothills Park, past Castle Rock, and into the Walnut Creek open space, and it continues on where it is labeled as the American Discovery Trail. So this is the first time I've seen the American Discovery Trail on a map, and it's in our Walnut Creek open space, and it goes right by the school where all the elementary school where all our kids went to school, and it follows along. This is our house down here, which follows along Indian Creek, and the boys used to walk from our house to the school. But now when we get to the school, instead of turning left to go to school, if we turn and head east, we can get to Delaware. It's just 4,700 miles. So, it was just a neat discovery. when you get to the Indian Valley School and you follow this up past the road that used to go to the water tower, and you climb over a ladder that goes over a barbed wire fence, you walk down, get on La Casa Villa and head down towards John Muir. You get on the Ignacio Canal trail. And that gets you on the Contra Costa Canal trail. So this is looking from my ridge, the summit ridge, across to the Shell Ridge, different time of year. And the Indian Valley School playground is right up here. This shows the Ignacio branch of the Contra Costa Canal trail. This is the Shell Ridge. I think that this is basically Miwok territory. It could also be the Chochenyo branch of the Ohlone, but I think we're in Bay Miwok territory, and the Bay Miwok culture is interesting, and that'll be when I return. I'm going to continue work backwards in history from the Miwok as they were before the Europeans came. Next week, you're going to get a continuation of where I left off, which was the first immigrants to come to California, and it's going to be in the hands of a paleontologist, David Clinnick, which Carol, Iko, Harold, and we all attended his replacement lecture for when Ramsey was away. All right, so that's where I'm gonna stop and take questions, entertain discussion.
That was really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, you could tell them that that map, they've really fixed up the Iron Horse Trail very nicely, especially at the Rudgear entrance. And that's where I picked up that map. And there's a whole bunch of them right now because they just put it in there. And it probably won't last because people will get interested in it. But you can pick it up at the beginning of the Iron Horse Trail on the Walnut Creek side. I don't know about the Danville side.
Yeah, you can get both of them on the website I showed. Yeah.
It would be fun to do a little tour, just like a small group.
David would be more than glad to lead it.
That would be so fun.
We've been out a couple of times, and he still has plenty to say.
The other thing is, I don't know how many people read Arax's book, Dreamt Land, but he talks about, like the Central Valley, the water table has dropped so much, the land is sunk like 30 feet. I mean, can you imagine 30 feet? And the thing is, all that water that's coming down the canals, it's got to get pumped because it's dropped. And so sometimes it's, going the wrong way. The water won't flow down to Southern California.
Wow. Yeah, we're in bad shape.
That's going to add to our grocery bills, I'm sure, the electrical costs of transporting water.
John, speaking of the Salton Sea, when you were first talking about it. It's existed several different times in the last couple of millennia. And there's a book called Colossus that tells the history of the Colorado River and the development on the All-American Canal and the other Green Valley down the Coachella Valley.
Yeah,
It's really worth a read.
Colossus.
Yeah, I think that's the name of it. I'll
Yeah.
double check myself and send you a link.
Oh, yeah, please do. Please do.
That on it. I'd be really interested.
What?
When Harold gets the title, or confirms it, I'd be really interested in reading that. That would be great.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll send it to the distribution.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, folks. See you next week. By the way, next week is dual. You can either attend here on Zoom, or you can come to our back porch.
Oh, great. I'll be in Wyoming, but I can probably zoom in if I remember.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
John, looking forward to it. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.